Assalamu alaikum, everyone. İyi akşamlar. Good evening from Istanbul, Turkey. Thank you for your patience. My name is Dr. Obaid Ruff on behalf of our director, Dr. Sami Al-Arian. Welcome. This is a webinar by CIGA, Center for Islam and Global Affairs. We are located at Istanbul Sabahattin Zaim University here in Istanbul. Tonight we have many speakers. It's a 2-hour webinar, but it will go quickly. We want to allow as much time for questions as possible. We will introduce each speaker. They will speak for 8 minutes, and then we will ask one question before we go to the next speaker. At the end of that, we will then open it up to questions that we receive. And with that, I'm going to turn over to my co-host, U.S Khan, who is a senior researcher here at CIGA, also a PhD candidate at the university. U.S.
Thank you, Ubaid. So we're our first speaker is Ms. Samia Assed. She is a human rights activist and community organizer at the local, national, international level. She has been advocating for the rights and empowerment of Palestinian, Jewish, Chicano, Indigenous, and Black communities. She currently chairs the Albuquerque Center for Peace and Justice. She also chairs the SWOP, which is a sex workers outreach project. And she's also the chair and president of the New Mexico Women's March. She's been on the board, a board member of the National Women's March. Along with other things that she is involved in. She has been elected as a delegate to the 2020 DNC. And Samia recognized achievements include that of Southwest Angel Community Award by the Albuquerque Journal and the Gian Guana Social Justice Spirit Award. Ms. Samia, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Ois. I would like to correct that I am chair of the Southwest Organizing Project, SWOP, proud organization of 40 years, a Chicano-led organization. Hello, everybody. Thank you for this opportunity to speak with such a wonderful host of panelists. Again, my name is Samia Assed. I'm a third-generation Palestinian American. I come to you from Albuquerque, New Mexico. I'm a proud grassroots feminist and human rights activist. And I would like to kind of introduce myself and my work so as we go into deeper conversations, you understand what informs me. Like in my introduction, I am a grassroots activist, and I build with community here in the Southwest predominantly and nationally, with indigenous groups like the Red Nation, with the Chicano, which is a Hispanic community, the indigenous community in New Mexico, and with Jewish community and Black, and the Black community here as well. The connecting dots has been the most important piece of work I could do as an activist, as a Muslim mother of 9, getting out of my silo and understanding how the Palestine cause and my Muslim issues are connected to domestic systemic racism that impacts other people of color communities, and understanding how I need to organize and address the same issues that face them as well that face us here domestically. One of the campaigns I led was the Poor People's Campaign. I was the chair here in New Mexico, and it addressed poverty, racism, systemic, ecological devastation, and militarism. And this campaign just outlined to me how deep-seated the problems are and how connected I am on a domestic agenda. And it just empowered me to engage and to uplift with much more authenticity my human rights demand. The poverty issues impact the Muslim community even at a higher rate than the national average. that we see in this community in America, especially in a pandemic, during a pandemic, as we see with COVID. The impact of and the devastation that has hit us, our community, is no different than the rest of the country. So understanding the intersectional building on every human level was very important for me, and that's how I mobilize and connect and work with community. I'm a lifelong time member of the Democratic Party. My father was a big part of it, of the Democratic Party. We understand it. We're proud Democrats. And I was chosen as, voted in as a delegate for the DNC, the Democratic National Conference, this July. I have to say that was a really demoralizing experience for me as a Palestinian American. While I understood the power that was in my hand to vote in and to make change and be part of a democratic process, living the experience as a Palestinian American and understanding the language that was inserted into the democratic platform really underlined what the work that needs to be done still has to be done over and over in our communities and at large in American systems of power. Also, as well, I was part of the Muslim advocates, the Muslim delegates that did the work as well within the convention. And within that context, there was a good opportunity for me as a Palestinian American to build with Muslim Americans across the country. And quite frankly, it was probably one of the first times I've seen how Muslims network with one another outside of like the grassroots activism that that's very raw and very true and very authentic to the movement. Here I move into and get introduced to a very establishment-like Muslim presence that, quite frankly, didn't sit very right with me. It wasn't a very comfortable place to be in, and right away red flags came up. It's like, why are you representing the Muslim community? What authenticity, what legitimacy do you carry to represent my voice? And I understand the grassroots and the hard work that's been done for years in advocating for Muslim and Palestinian issues. And this takes me to an organization called MGAGE. MGAGE is an organization that it rose out of nowhere. It rose to power very fast. And its members predominantly were cultured in an education that was cultivated out of a pro-Zionist agenda, and what seemed to me didn't seem to me to be informed against the real needs of the community. As we started to organize, one of the incidents that we had was the attacks on Linda Sarsour by now President-elect Biden. But he had said something about Linda Sarsour, the Muslim activist, about her views being extreme, and she was shunned. And then we demanded a meeting with the Biden campaign, and was facilitated by Farouk Mita, who is supposed to be a Muslim voice or a Muslim representative with the campaign. And what entailed was really a series of conversations that really outlaid an organization that is coming to power at the backs of the Palestinian community. It has used the voices to build power, to build a platform, and to really co-opt the narrative without really defending our own community. To me, that signified a very, very dangerous precedence. And it just, the alarm bells went off to like, okay, who's going to represent us coming in the next 4 years? We understand the importance of having our own narrative and being true to the narrative as much as possible, not deviating away from it as you enter into these spaces. So they had no authenticity. They had no legitimacy within the grassroots activism, and yet they had the platform to say that they represent us. So this to me was an issue I had taken on with some of the other Muslim Americans, and a campaign that was started across the country ensued to tackle on or an organization and leadership that normalizes Zionism, that normalizes occupation, that and yet claims to speak for the Muslim community. And as we see, there were articles that came out with the Electronic Intifada, the Middle East Eye. There's an abundance of information out there that actually exposed how patriarchy, how really power-grabbing Muslims, or so-called Muslims, take away from the real legitimate demands of the community on the ground. Muslim Americans have a lot to work for in the next 4 years and have a lot to organize. And what we need to do is make sure we prioritize the spaces, the platforms, and the leadership, and we vet through who we want to be in those spaces. We have to create the institutions, the organizations, and the education that has to go behind all of that. It takes a community with leadership. It takes the smallest, youngest member of the community to get involved and really take control of the narrative. So I believe movement on the ground within the Muslim community is extremely important in making sure there's accountability, and making sure there's transparency and no deviation from what our true narrative and our demands are vis-a-vis domestic policy towards the Muslim community. We had a Muslim ban. We had a high rise of Islamophobia. We've had profiling, domestic profiling. We've had, in a post-September 11th world, we faced a lot as a community, and we demand representation that's going to be authentic to us. So the work for us as a community, it demands that we rise up to the occasion and get engaged locally and get out of our silos and engage with different movements to understand how to move forward, and not give up a platform that is ours. Hold accountable those who claim to be representing us, and really, if they don't represent us, they need to step aside, and we'll create our own.
Ms. Samia, thank you for your insights on
Thank you.
On the recent history of American Muslim activism, especially as it comes to representative politics in the United States. I think that one of the things that you mentioned is the relationship between authentic representation and what might be considered more respectability politics, in which certain people are doing a kind of communal identity theft on behalf of American Muslims. Could you please point us to what kind of representatives are authentic in your opinion, and which are not?
Some of the, well, first off, any representation that is informed by community and is true and to the community that it represents and held accountable, there you will find leadership that you can call authentic representation. Some of the organizations like the American Muslims for Palestine have actually taken leadership on this and understood the dangers of not speaking out as to what is right and what is wrong. So they took leadership. Their U.S. CMO, the 13 organizations that finally understood the role and the leadership and the responsibility that lays on their shoulders. This is an umbrella organization for the 13 major organizations in the country have stepped up. It took some time because these are very hard places for leadership to understand how to dissect. But as a people, we have to make sure we're holding our leadership accountable. Elected officials, like I said in previous conversations, the likes of Rashida Tlaib and the likes of Ilhan Omar, who represent the Muslim community, who are congressional congresswomen, but they still are very true to the needs of the community. Those are the kind of leaderships that you want to see.
Thank you very much. Our next, we're moving right along. We're still going to focus on the impact of the recent election on domestic issues. Our next speaker is Raja Abdulhaq. He is a Muslim Palestinian activist, community organizer, and a researcher. Currently, he's a graduate student in international affairs at Brooklyn College. Raja is currently the executive director of Majlis Shura, Islamic Leadership Council in New York. I want to remind everybody that who is watching that you can send your questions via chat, either on Facebook or Zoom. Thank you very much. The floor is yours, Mr. Raja.
Assalamualaikum. Thank you, Dr. Awais, and thank you for Dr. Sami and CIGA staff for this invitation, for hosting this. I'm gonna do my best to be brief because we have a other list of amazing speakers that I'm looking forward to listen to. But I wanna, before I talk about current day politics, specifically after the elections, I wanna contextualize the moment that we're in. And I think a pivotal moment that we as Muslims in the West, and specifically in America, can go back to all the time, the attacks of September 11. And I want to link that to the idea of assimilation and integration in Western societies for minorities. And as all of us know, the process of assimilation overall, when a new immigrant, and here I'm talking about specifically Muslim immigrants, I'm not talking about native Black Muslims who've been here for hundreds of years, but because currently, unfortunately, only the immigrant community is spearheading the politics within the Muslim community, and without enough representation and leadership from the Black Muslim community not being involved in these circles most of the time, which is something hopefully we can look into and fix as soon as possible. But one issue when it comes to assimilation theories for these immigrant Muslims is the concept of one-way process. And as we know, before September 11, and Edward Said talked about it many times, the idea that Islam was looked at as a foreign religion, as a foreign set of values that conflict with Western Judeo-Christian values that exist here. And because of that, Muslims were torn between looking at America as and specifically seeking the so-called American dream versus seeing America as a colonial power that supports dictatorship and supports the occupation of Palestine and other Muslim lands. So it was a conflict, and that made it even harder for them to integrate and assimilate in this country because of American foreign politics, but at the same time because of what assimilation dictates them to do, which is to admit that their values are inferior to the values of the natives here, that they have to shed themselves from these values and accept these values. And that was mostly not just political, but it was mostly focused on social values. However, after September 11, as we know, when George Bush declared the so-called war on terror campaign, echoing the clash of civilization theories and the ideas that you're either with us or against us rhetoric, and that Muslims are collectively responsible for attacks. And that rhetoric that started with the war on terror campaign was significant to justify Islamophobia, was significant and important to justify the wars in Iraq and in Afghanistan and the rest of the Muslim land. However, after the Democrats came on board, specifically with the Obama administration, this concept of Islamophobia, this concept of clash of civilization has evolved into something called liberal Islamophobia, as it was phrased by researchers. And the concept of liberal Islamophobia goes back to the dichotomy of what Professor Mamdani identified, the concept of good Muslim versus bad Muslims, where Bush used to directly and vocally accuse Muslims to being complicit in these attacks. This new rhetoric about good Muslims versus bad Muslims is about you either accept America as an empire, you endorse it, you let go of your so-called radical politics, or you are considered a bad Muslim. And that rhetoric continues until today, but now we have way of forcing it on the Muslim community. And we've been seeing it lately, specifically when it comes to social issues, specifically about sexual and gender issues that are becoming the dominating cultural wars between the right and the left in the West. And Muslims are torn and stuck in the middle. Now, to put that in more perspective about what's happening today, I think it was made clear that whereas Trump was a clear issue, he's an idiot who's controlling the United States, and as we know, United States is an empire that directly or indirectly is dominating or has hegemony on the rest of the world. You know, but at the end of the day, while he was an idiot and someone who is openly racist, openly sexist, openly xenophobic against, you know, everybody except the white race, today we have another form of liberal Islamophobia embodied by the Biden and Harris and the Democratic system that existed before during the Obama administration, and endorsed the Rand talking points of creating a division between so-called modern Muslims or good Muslims versus pre-modernist or not or bad Muslims. And I'm afraid that while the Muslim community, especially after September 11, as we know, they've been engaged in defensive mobilization, an idea that the way to mobilize the Muslim community after September 11 is, for the most part, limited in the category of proving our loyalty to the system, proving our loyalty to this country and to this empire, specifically politically when it comes to engaging in electoral politics, but at the same time also accepting the foreign policies of this country. And we have seen this specifically nowadays, where we have a role, like for instance, we can take an example of, you know, previously was a congressman, now he's the general attorney of Minnesota, Keith Ellison, who is the first Muslim congressman. And this is a model of what I'm referring to when it comes to assimilation, both morally, socially and politically. As we know, Keith Ellison's position on Palestine has not been the best. He's someone who sent a letter in 2007, I think, to the leaders of the resistance movements in Palestine to release the Israeli soldier without even mentioning the pain of 10,000 Palestinian prisoners. He just recently, earlier last month, I think, he attended the former President Rabin tribute of Israel, and many Palestinian activists and leaders urged him to not attend it, but as usual, he was against that, and he thought he was more progressive to be so-called more open-minded towards these issues. So I think here the price was that in order for him to be accepted in the mainstream political era, he has to let go of some of his convictions, specifically when it comes to political issues. But on the other hand, while Ilhan Omar is having some good political stances when it comes to Palestine, her positions on social issues have been not meeting the values of the Muslim community, specifically when it comes to sexuality issues. So now, as I mentioned earlier, it's kind of being engaged in electoral politics, specifically on that level, has been proven that in order for you to be given a platform, specifically in the Democrats, in a democratic platform, you have to accept certain parameters, whether it comes to foreign political policies or domestic social and moral issues. So I think now we're torn between the two extremes of being on the political aspect and the moral and social aspect. And I think this leads us into to ask ourselves some questions. So what's after Trump? And I know the topic of today is, you know, the elections after Biden, but the question personally I think we should be phrasing is, what is the Muslims' priority or priorities after getting rid of Trump? What is going to be our strategy moving forward when it comes to engaging in electoral politics? Are we gonna continue to support Democrats 100% with no questions asked, or are we going to be pulling discussions regarding what happened in 2000, when actually the Muslim community came together and did some political analysis. Where do we need to stand, or who do we need to support in order for our interests or in order for our agenda to be taken into account? In addition to that, I think, and I'll end here, is that if one important aspect that we're seeing, or one actually important issue that I'm seeing, is the overzealous of the Muslim community when it comes to the Democrats and the election of Biden. I mean, for two reasons. Number one, let's not forget that at least 70 million Americans still voted for an openly racist, sexist, and xenophobic president until today. No matter what he said, no matter how the liberal media have been demonizing him, and fairly so, for 4 years, he still got 70 million votes. Couple of million votes over what Obama got in 2008. And on the other hand, when it comes to Biden, what kind of structural changes are we trying to see from the Biden administration, given that when Biden and Trump and Obama were in the office, we rarely saw any progressive policies being implemented. And one small example that I'm seeing going around is the issue of the Arab dictators in the Arab world. We see as if Trump was the reason behind Sisi's dictatorship in Egypt, and people are forgetting that it was Obama and Biden who staged and engineered a coup and military coup in Egypt, resulting in the murder of thousands of innocent Egyptian civilians as a cause of this military coup. Even though Trump is more vocal in his support, but I think we go back now into what Malcolm X said back, in the 60s, around dealing with Democrats and Republicans when it comes to the dichotomy of the wolves versus the fox. I think now the Muslim community more than ever needs to be more alert, needs to be more shrewd when it comes to how do we navigate involving or engaging in electoral politics without shitting ourselves
Mr.
away
Raj,
from
I'm
our
gonna
own.
have to jump in. I'm sorry,
No worries.
we gotta move. I know that you were concluding there. I'm gonna have to ask you a couple of questions so that we can move forward. You said a lot of interesting things on the issues of foreign policy. One of the things that struck me was that the Muslim community seems to be caught in a bind between an isolationist America, which allows for basically non-interference in other countries, which might be something that people who are concerned with empire might support. On the other hand, it seems that in some instances, Muslims in America still advocate for post-colonial rights of people in the Muslim world from the standpoint of Washington, asking for America to intervene in certain ways. So a Biden administration is one that would be based upon a liberal interventionist policy that is starkly different than something that we saw in the last 4 years. How do Muslims deal with keeping committed to our notions of justice, yet having to choose between basically two terrible options? It doesn't seem like on the question of foreign policy, either option is better than the other.
No, very good question, and I think here the question regarding Western intervention in the Middle East, specifically in Muslim lands, and I know Professor Hafsa is going to talk a little bit later about American Muslim exceptionalism here. But I think it's essential to understand that it goes back to what I said earlier, which is the concept of defensive mobilization. I think, unfortunately, some portion of the Muslim community in America is being involved in the concept of accepting the empire as is and trying to actually become an integral part of this empire, naively thinking that we can change the empire from within. And that goes against the very essence of what a political and a colonial and imperialist empire is about. So I think here the Muslim community is definitely torn here, because let's take, for example, the situation in Syria. as we know, almost 1 million people have, lost their lives because of the issue of Syria, because we know Assad has been, committing genocide against his own people. But at the same time, many people who are calling to end the genocide in Syria are not okay with America being involved there, because we know that throughout history, imperial or colonial powers do not intervene to help people, but rather take advantage of their situation, exploit their political issues in order to advance their agenda and their interest. I think American Muslims currently should focus, in my humble opinion, should focus on their own domestic and internal issues, and do not get involved in issues that pertain to the Middle East, because the way we see the Middle East, unfortunately, for the past few decades, have been whitewashed into seeing it from an American angle rather than seeing it from Middle Eastern angle. So I do advise my brothers and sisters in America to focus on the domestic issues and let the Muslims and non-Muslims, Arabs, anybody who lives in the Middle East, to dictate how they themselves would like to see politics, and how they would like to not involve Western powers. Because, and I'll end with this, is I lived in Palestine for 18 years. I was born and raised there. And I've firsthand experienced Israeli occupation and the funds of Israel, the funds of America, the political support to Israel, the veto in the UN against Israeli crimes in Palestine. So an average Palestinian is not going to look at America the same way a Muslim who lives in America is going to look at America. I think we just have to accept that when it comes to foreign politics, America is an empire that we must stop, because that's our obligation. And when it comes to being involved in electoral politics, I think that should be directed and should be focused on, fixing the issues that are relevant to us domestically here.
Thank you very much. That was a very insightful take on the question of American foreign policy after Biden. Our next speaker is Alhaj Mauri Salaakhan. He is a Washington resident-based human rights advocate, author, lecturer, and poet. His work has taken him across America, into Africa, Europe, the subcontinent, and the Middle East. In the past, he founded the Ad Hoc Coalition Against Political Imprisonment and National Association for Police Accountability. He also founded and served as Director of Operations for the Peace Through Justice Foundation, a Metro DC-based grassroots human rights organization. Currently, he serves as the Director of Operations for the Aafia Foundation, a grassroots Muslim-led human rights organization. Mr. Salaakhan, the floor is yours.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. I begin with a note of thanks to CIGA for inviting me to the table for this conversation. I too would like to contextualize the moment we are in, but contextualize it spiritually. There's a verse in the Quran that reads, "No calamity occurs except by the permission of Allah." There's another ayah that reads in translation, very well known and often referenced, "Corruption has appeared on the land and on the sea on account of what men's hands have wrought. Allah will make them taste a part of what they have done so that they might return to the path of rectitude and right guidance." We in America have been visited by a number of back-to-back shocks over the past year. First, we had the global pandemic, which is still going on. Secondly, a national justice-related uprising, which again is still going on. And now we just had an unprecedented election, followed by an unprecedented response by the loser of the election, a response which has now shaken America politically at its core. All of this represents an opportunity for a desperately needed reset on the American landscape, socially, economically, culturally, and politically. The question is, are we communally wise enough to take advantage of this opportunity? In 1915, a labor activist and songwriter by the name of Joe Hill composed the following verse. If the workers take a notion, they can stop all speeding trains. Every ship upon the ocean, they can tie with mighty chains. Every wheel in the creation, every mine and every mill, fleets and armies of the nation will at their command stand still. Now these words, this interesting verse reminds me of two other quotes which are highly relevant for this moment we're in right now. The first comes from the revolutionary psychiatrist known as Frantz Fanon. May Allah bless his soul. The second comes from the extraordinarily talented Indian activist intellectual Arundhati Roy. Fanon said in his book titled Wretched of the Earth, each generation must, out of relative obscurity, discover its mission, fulfill it, or betray it. In a visit to the U.S. some years ago, Arundhati Roy said the following, quote, "The battle has to begin here in America. The only institution more powerful than the U.S. government is American civil society. The rest of us are subjects of slave nations. We are by no means powerless, but you have the power of proximity. You have access to the imperial palace and the emperor's chambers. The empire's conquests are being carried out in your name," end quote. And this brings me to another verse from the Quran that reads, Allah will not change the condition of a people until they change what is within themselves. I'll stop here, and I look forward to the conversation to follow, inshallah.
Thank you very much, Mr. Salaakhan. That was very unique in your approach, that you brought in a more spiritual angle in assessing what are usually very cold political calculations. It reminds us that our calling is higher than just day-to-day negotiations of who and what can be achieved, or self-interested power grabbing. My question to you is, given that it seems that we have Muslim interests that fall both on the liberal side and the conservative side, meaning Republican and Democrat. On what grounds do Muslim political organizations and activists like yourself choose to back a certain candidate over another? And how does that assessment, how does that logic work exactly? Because as I see, it seems like it's arguments fall in both directions. I mean, you have people who are prioritize, for instance, private life issues more than they care about foreign policy. So what are the red lines? How do we begin to create a more unified political platform, given the fact that Muslim interests are, they seem to fall on both ends?
We need to take a page. Well, we need to do two things, in my humble opinion. First, we need to take a page out of, well, let me back up. First, we need to take to heart the message that was conveyed by the former U.S. Attorney General Ramsey Clark years ago when we invited him to the Washington area to deliver a speech. And at the end of his speech, in an audience, a large audience full of Muslims and non-Muslims, and a number of the non-Muslims were very prominent figures from the political sphere here in the DC area. At the end of his speech, he said, "America needs Muslims to stand up for Islam. It is the one revolutionary force that truly cares about humanity." This is what the former U.S. Attorney General of the United States, during one of the most turbulent decades in American history, the 1960s, said to an audience of Muslims and non-Muslims at the end of his speech. That's point number one. Point number two, and this is something that we as Muslims should take to heart. Point number two, and this connects with point number two. Muslims have got to stop this habit of engaging in the political process the way that our non-Muslim brethren do, our non-Muslim friends and neighbors, because that is a failing paradigm. Giving money to politicians, trying to curry favor through this means, and playing, the politics, the tribal, the politically sectarianistic or secularistic politics, the way that our friends and neighbors play them is another downer, in my humble opinion. This does not and will never provide us with the formula that we need in order to discharge the sacred responsibility we have on our shoulders as Muslims to enjoin the good or command the good and forbid the evil. We're not going to be able to do it by following, the lizard into its hole. This is another very, very important point. We have to approach politics different. We really have to approach politics, engaging in politics in America and in other parts of the world where we are a numerical minority. We have to engage in as unified fashion as we possibly can, and with a consciousness of accountability, an ever-present consciousness on the individual level and on the communal level to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is the only way we're going to be successful. And beyond this, the only positive example that I will point to from our cousins in the faith community, and not all of these folk are cousins in the faith community. Many are hardcore Zionists who are deeply embedded in a doctrine, a philosophy of atheism or agnosticism. But those who are our cousins in faith, the Jewish community, they have demonstrated an ability to transcend the minor differences within and among themselves in order to pursue what they consider to be larger communal goals. This is something that Muslims need to learn, especially in places like the United States of America, where we represent a sizable numeric minority, a sizable minority, and but not only that, with tremendous gifts, intellectual gifts, and material gifts, or capability that we could be harnessing both for the good of ourselves and for the good of the better of the two Americas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Alhaj. Let us, I'm going to turn it over to Ubaid to introduce the rest of our speakers and then after that, we'll move towards an open discussion. Ubaid?
Thank you, Uwais. I already have some interesting questions for our speakers. Thank you all again for joining us. If you are logging in late, our topic is Biden, the future of American Muslims and U.S. policy towards the Muslim world. We invite your questions. We want to talk about things both domestic to the U.S. and also the United States foreign policy. Our next speaker is Dr. Hafsa Kanjwal. She is an assistant professor of South Asian history at Lafayette College. She received her PhD in history and women's studies from the University of Michigan. Her research focuses on post-partition state building in Kashmir. Dr. Kanjwal has also written and spoken on Kashmir for a variety of media outlets, including Washington Post, Al Jazeera, English, and the BBC. Dr. Hafsa, the floor is yours. Take 9 minutes, please, then I'll ask a question.
Okay, assalamu alaikum everyone. Thank you so much for having me and to CIGA for hosting this important discussion. So I wanted to touch upon a few things. Some of it might be repetitive, but who knows, maybe it'll still be helpful. So of course we can understand that a lot of people felt relief once Trump was out of, or hopefully will be out of office, and that this country isn't, stepping into full-on fascism with a second Trump presidency. But I think it's important to acknowledge that we cannot be complacent under a Biden presidency that remains true to the core principles of America as a white supremacist neoliberal empire. My own personal concern is that we are going to go back into thinking that these past 4 years were an anomaly, right? That this is something that was an unusual period in American history. And then also go back into engaging in the kind of American Muslim politics that we saw during the Obama era. And I think the Obama era was actually very instructive for and revealing for the American Muslim community. And if I could maybe say a bit about what that period was, it was an acceleration of the kind of complicity that we saw amongst the American Muslim leadership after 9/11. Obama held a smokescreen over all of us, including American Muslims. His period saw a rise in drone attacks, devastating policies for our communities, which included counter-violence extremism, or CVE, which were so incredibly toxic and divisive for our institutions. And more importantly, Obama did what many empires do. He enabled the rise of a professional Muslim class that provided a cover for his actions. He had someone, for example, who was responsible for engagement with the Muslim community. He had his annual White House iftar. And I think the one moment that perfectly encapsulates Obama and the American Muslim community for me is the 2014 iftar, the White House iftar, where Obama justified Israel's 2014 assault against Palestinians in Gaza, which had led to the death of over 2,000 Palestinians and 10,000 more that were injured. And even had the audacity to have the Israeli ambassador speak to a room full of American Muslims as they were breaking their fast. And no one budged, no one got up to leave. All of these leaders just sat there in silence. And that is when you know that the cultivated leadership, right? Nobody's elected these people. They've somehow, because of their connections and so on, the cultivated leadership has fundamentally lost its moral and ethical core. And throughout his period, it became very evident that our organizations were overwhelmingly more interested in having access to power than actually representing our agenda. And as Raja had mentioned before, it really destroyed the full potential of what a Muslim political community could look like. So if we think about the past 4 years under Trump, for all of its problems and issues, it has provided a sort of political clarity about America that was simply not possible under Trump. And it has led to some important and long-awaited conversations about the role of imperialism, neoliberalism, and white supremacy in the US. And it's also cultivated a younger generation of American Muslims that are becoming politically mature, and they're a lot more critical, for example, than my generation, which was still reeling from the kind of respectability politics we were forced to engage in as a result of 9/11. And I think this is something that might be different and is positive about moving forward, where we now hopefully do have a critical mass of individuals and institutions who can push back, who have been organizing, who are also building solidarity with other movements. But at the same time, this professional class who really kind of positioned themselves as the resistance under Trump is going to be back as well. And we know, as others have mentioned, that they're going to be native informants for the Democratic establishment. And we've already kind of seen how the Biden campaign has engaged with American Muslims and the kinds of organizations that are propped like Engaged that don't represent our interests. So what do we need to do moving forward? The first thing that I think is important is that we as organizations, individuals need to put a check on American exceptionalism. It's always amused me that people got so angry about Trump's S-hole countries comment when we have American Muslim leaders who actually have the same exact mindset. We have Salam Al-Mariyati at MPAC and the folks over at Engage saying that any kind of dissent or pushing back is being petty and destructive and bringing politics from back home to the US context. So just think about that for a second. What is he trying to say, or what are they trying to say about back home? That it's irrational, it's uncivilized. And so that is the kind of attitude that many of our Muslim leaders have towards the Muslim world. And the irony, of course, is that many of these institutions that are bemoaning back home politics are the same ones that have been run by the same Desi or Arab men for the past decades, right? Decades. Second is that we need to bring back an internationalist agenda. And this is again linked to this idea of American exceptionalism. Our lives here are not more important or more valuable than those who are the victims of American imperialism, period. It astounds me that the community has completely forgotten about what the US has done in Iraq and Afghanistan and dozens of other places around the world. Even mentioning, for example, that Biden voted for the Iraq war, so maybe we shouldn't be propping him up as this compassionate and decent leader, which I've seen a lot of American Muslims do, were deemed as being radical for saying such a thing. So it just goes to kind of show you like how we value our own lives and our comfort more than those around the world. And then the third thing that I think is really important is to understand that Islamophobia is not just restricted to the Muslim ban or someone saying mean things about Muslims. We are actually dealing with anti-Muslim racism, which is built into the fabric of a number of institutions in this country. And we need to move beyond the kind of symbolism that so many of us seem to get excited by. What's the point of Biden saying, inshallah, if he bombs Muslim communities around the world? This is again going back to the Obama smokescreen. And of course, we need to ensure that the Muslim ban needs to be revoked, but this seems to be the only thing that's on the agenda of a number of a lot of mainstream Muslim organizations. And Biden apparently is going to do that on day one. So what next? What are we going to do after the Muslim ban is revoked? What are the other things that we are going to hold the next administration accountable for? And where are the Muslim organizations or mainstream Muslim organizations that are talking about things like surveillance, abolition, entrapment, Guantanamo, the military-industrial complex, the ravages of capitalism? And aren't these the issues that our community needs to be in front of because of our religious values? And I will say that there are smaller efforts. Of course, they don't have the resources that they need that are kind of addressing some of these really important issues. But those are the kinds of grassroots groups that I think need to be brought to the fore. And finally, we need to hold these institutions accountable. We have to have some dignity and self-respect and not allow ourselves to be tokenized or taken for a ride. I hope that we can continue to develop the kind of political maturity to understand that we can be the community that actually serves as a moral and ethical guide in this country, instead of just serving as a prop for certain individuals' self-interest or aspirations for power. That's all.
Thank you, Dr. Hafsa. I agree with you. I lived in the United States as an attorney during the Obama administration, and I agree with you that it was a smokescreen for the Muslim community. People see Trump as very Islamophobic. I see him as a continuation of most American presidents who have been Islamophobic, but Trump's just not intelligent enough to hide it. He brags about it, he incites it, he's very open about it, but it's really just a continuation of how the American presidents have mostly been. My question for you, I like what El-Hajj Mauri said about his challenge. Are we communally smart enough to approach the new administration to be able to influence policy? Are we communally smart enough to do that? My question is, do you think that Biden, when he was running his campaign, do you think he intentionally chose Muslim groups that he knew don't necessarily reflect Muslims? Do you think that he intentionally chose Engage and Impact to basically put the Muslim community against itself right from the start?
That's a good question. I mean, I don't necessarily think this is just a Biden administration thing. I mean, ever since 9/11, if we look at something called the RAND report, which has, that's this very conservative security institution think tank in the U.S. The project of building these moderate, secular, liberal Muslim institutions has been ongoing for decades now. So I think because that project has been so ongoing, and the kinds of institutions that they've created, the kinds of places where they've decided to fund and put resources and create this leadership class, of course, an organization like Engage is going to come out of it, right? Or an organization like MPAC, which existed before 9/11, is going to be co-opted into it. So I think that these are just the people who have had access to power. They've had access to the Democratic establishment even before the Biden campaign started. And right, for example, Farooq Mehta was Hillary Clinton's Muslim outreach coordinator. So of course, when it's time for Biden to figure out how he can get the Muslim vote, he will tap into those same individuals. Do I think that they know that these people don't necessarily represent the community? I think they might know that, or maybe they're being led to believe that they do represent the community. I'm not sure exactly what the dynamic is there, but this has been going on for many, many years.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Mujeeb Khan. Mujeeb was a Fulbright research scholar in the Persian Gulf, and he's published extensively on the politics and history of the modern Muslim world, including mass media from the New York Times to Al Jazeera, as well as leading academic journals. His latest is a framework chapter in an edited volume, Turkey's July 15 coup, What Happened and Why, from the University of Utah Press, which is 2018 publication. He is also a doctoral candidate in political science at UC Berkeley. Mujeeb, thank you for your time. As a doctoral student, I know that you're very busy, lots of writing and numerous projects to do. I appreciate you taking time to talk to us and answer some questions. Hold on, Dr. Mujeeb. Start again. We can't hear you. Still can't hear you now.
I think there's something wrong with your mic.
Still not good.
There's a lot of background noise. I'm not really sure if it's going to be. Maybe you can sign out and sign back in, and then we can go on to the next speaker.
Yeah, let's do that. Anyways, Mujeeb, we'll come back to you. We'll go to the next speaker, take some time and troubleshoot. We'll come back to you. Okay. Next on our doc is our director, Dr. Sami Al-Arian. Dr. Sami is our director for CIGA, Center for Islam and Global Affairs. He's a public affairs professor at Istanbul Sabahattin Zaim University. He's received his PhD in computer engineering in 1986, and he was a tenured professor in the U.S. for many years. He received many teaching awards and grants and has over 40 publications. During his 4 decades in the U.S., he founded numerous institutions and publications in the fields of education, research, religion, and interfaith, as well as civil and human rights. He's a prolific speaker across many U.S. campuses, especially on Palestine, Islam in the West, and civil rights. And in 2001, he was named by Newsweek as the premier civil rights activist in the U.S. for his efforts to repeal the use of secret evidence in immigration courts. In 2012, he was profiled by historians of the Encyclopedia of American Dissidents as one of only 3 Muslims in the U.S. out of 152 U.S. dissidents and prisoners of conscience in the past century, included in the 2-volume series. This was along with Malcolm X and Muhammad Ali. His U.S. story was featured in 2007 in the award-winning documentary U.S versus Al-Arian, and in 2016 in the book Being Palestinian. Dr. Al-Arian has written dozens of articles that have been translated to many languages, focusing on U.S. foreign policy, Palestine, and the Arab Spring. His book of poetry on spirituality, Palestine, and human rights, Conspiring Against Joseph, was published in 2004. Dr. Sami, we know you're always busy, not sleeping, very, very active. Thank you for joining your own think tank organization. We know that you have lots of experience in U.S. politics and were instrumental in helping President Bush in his election. And I'll let you speak about your experiences in this domain.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you so much, Obaid and Awais, for moderating this important session. I want to thank my co-panelists also for their insights, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion. I just want to make brief points. First of all, about American Muslims within the context of politics, and then on American foreign policy outside. For American Muslims, certainly, they have been involved in politics. It's not something that new that we see today. But I think there was a difference between what was happening, I'd say, in the 90s and what we see today. These are times that I was part of that movement. At the time, I would say that the American Muslim leaders who were trying to lead some sort of a movement towards empowerment of Muslims, where Muslims were not politically active. And I want to exclude our African American brothers because they had a different context for their experience. I think it's very important that we understand the history of Islam in America, that we really have, generally speaking, 2 histories. One through the path of the indigenous Muslims, who are represented mainly by our African American brethren, and the immigrant Muslims. The phenomena of the immigrant Muslims started in the 1960s, but may have peaked in the 90s. And then you have generations that came after that. So today we're talking about the 2nd and 3rd generation of immigrants. But when we talk about our African American brothers, we're talking about centuries where they have been subjected to the same inhumane treatment and policies and structured racial system that the rest of the African Americans have been subjected to for centuries. Then through that it came their own experience, spiritual experience, where they became or reverted to Islam. That is one experience that is very important to distinguish between the immigrant experience. Nevertheless, there was this movement in trying to empower Muslims politically because they felt the target of attacks, particularly after the fall of the Third Soviet Union. I think that was probably the point by which Islam became a target. And I remember these times very vividly, how there was a movement, intellectual movement, within political circles, particularly in areas dealing with foreign policy, where Islam suddenly is becoming a threat to the national security establishment and to the designs of American imperial policy. So I need to distinguish between these two because this is very important. I don't want to belittle that experience. And everybody understands and knows the experience of Malcolm X and Muhammad Ali and all the struggles that they had to go through in order to empower the community, not only the African American community, but even the Muslims within the African American community, in which they have double strikes. But on the immigrant side, we were trying, in the 90s, to empower the Muslim community after they became targets. And I realized at the time that no community was able to empower itself politically before winning its civil rights battle. This is how you get respect in America. When you stand up for your rights and you sacrifice for your rights and you pay the price for these sacrifices and willing to stand up to those who are in power, like our African American brothers who were bitten by dogs and who were chastened by police and who were lynched and all kinds of things they had to go through, and then they had to go to the streets and march. And then after that much struggle that I don't have time to go over, they were at least on the face of it, policies were changed and they were empowered, even not full empowerment, but this is how they got respect. Our challenge at the time was something called secret evidence. So we identified that, and I think El-Hajj Mauri was with us all the way through that. He understands, he knows what happened then. We were trying to empower the Muslim community through the banning of this very dangerous policy by which a person could be brought before a court of law and then denied bail and denied due process rights based on evidence that he is not entitled to see legally. And then we won that fight for the most part. Again, I don't have time really to go over the details. And through that, we decided that if we win this fight, then we would have gained the respect of the American establishment, and then we can go to other battles. So we postponed all our foreign policy stuff. When the Muslim community decided to endorse Bush, it was a very narrow endorsement based on this assessment alone, that this was a very close election where the Muslim community can make a difference. And through that, they would be able to bring power to one party in return that they would gain what they were asking for, which is the banning of secret evidence. And we were able to deliver, just fate provided that Florida was the state that handed Bush the presidency. We, the people, the Muslim community in Florida was able to be basically reversing its trend of voting 3-1 Democrats. That particular one was 3-1 Republicans, and he won, and they recognized that. And he was about to ban the use of secret evidence, but that day was on 9/11. Of course, everything reversed back. The reason I'm reciting this very quickly is to show that yes, there was a political involvement and for the sake of political empowerment based on principles, and those principles were to stand up for our rights when it comes to civil rights. What we see today in some of the political involvement or empowerment is that there are no principles, and that's what worried me, and that's why we keep talking about that there must be some kind of red lines. There must be some kind of a principled political involvement, not something that is totally out of principles, empowerment for the sake of empowerment to empower a few. Now, most people, when they come to the Biden and those who are liaisoning with the Muslim community, they're trying to find jobs and find positions for Muslims within this administration. And it's not clear to us, not clear to me, but to other people, is what are the principles by which, what are the red lines by which they are not willing to cross, because those are the heart and soul of what it means, your identity, to means to be an American Muslim. And the experience we saw in the past few months when people were asked to walk back their Zionist connections or not to be involved in Zionist experiences and organizations, and they balked at that because the calculation, the hard calculation was that if we do that, we're going to lose power. So this power for the sake of power, I think, is a huge test that the American Muslim community must start asking itself about. And the next question that's coming pretty soon is who represents Muslims? A couple of our speakers today or tonight, they have alluded to that. And I think it's very important that you go independently to the Biden communication or to any American administration for that matter, and tell them that we represent the Muslims, not self-appointed Muslims. Those are who have constituencies, those who have organizations, and those organizations respect their people and respect what they stand for and respect the principles that make them proud American Muslims. They must demand that they will be spoken to directly. I want to allude also to the study that Hafsa mentioned, which is building moderate Muslim networks. This is a very dangerous study, very important study, by which they put a roadmap by which they can start classifying Muslims. And I think this is the dangerous thing that's been taking place at least since 2007, for the past dozen years or so, by which it's the American security establishment that starts calling a good Muslim bad Muslim, and what a good Muslim, what a moderate Muslim, what a hardliner Muslim, and what an extremist is, and what radical is. And I think we should reject all that, and that we should present a united front. And we need to start talking about the bigger issues rather than the small ones. And I believe getting into the power politics now, before establishing these principles by which you can be known for, is very dangerous precedent. It's not a Muslim face that will be in the Biden administration that we should be seeking. It is what principles are these people who will be joining such an administration. And let me just say something about foreign policy as well, because of the time limitation. Both Republicans and Democrats who have been ruling the United States since the fall of the Soviet Union, with the exception of Trump, and I will say something about Trump, are from the same camp, which is world domination. And this is a grand strategy that the U.S. has been seeking and has been following, and it's very dangerous that we play that game and we start justifying these kind of liberal attitudes, liberal hegemony that is taking place throughout these administrations. Trump was against liberal hegemony, but he is a very dangerous nevertheless, and it's probably more dangerous because of his xenophobic, racist attitudes, which was endangering, and it was putting at risk many people within the country, particular minorities and religious minorities and ethnic minorities, as well as basically putting at risk many of the principles that people stand for. He was a very polarizing person who was trying to divide the country. And when you look at exit polls and who actually supported him, you could see that this was a white supremacist at heart. He knew how to play the game and get these people to support him. And it is horrifying to know that there are 2 million people who have supported him. There is a lot of work to be done here for this to be, there has to be a larger conversation within society. But the American Muslims, which we are focusing on today, they must come to terms with what their role is. Their role is not to spread or expand American liberal hegemony throughout the Muslim world. Their role should be to stand up for the principles that their faith and their identity call for, and that's the challenge that is before them. They have to think on the same ways like Malcolm X was talking about, how to liberate the poor, the downtrodden, the wretched, the weak within society, how to stand up for justice. This is the era of being part of the ruling elites and getting a position at the Justice Department or the Defense Department or the State Department is great, but we're not there yet. You know, we shouldn't be speeding up to get these positions and then try to mix with those with the elites who have different kinds of designs upon the country and the world, and think that somehow this is how we got empowered. This is not empowerment. This is being used by the power elites to further their goals. I think what we need to do is to stand up as a community right now and try to seek a role for ourselves within the other social movements that are trying to stand up to power. You know, if this was a Bernie administration, I probably would have a different attitude towards it. But as Hafsa said, we shouldn't forget when we have Obama and Biden, the type of policies they pursued within the Muslim world. Many of the wars that we have today, they started at Bush, they continued during Obama, and as well as currently. And I think these are very different and dangerous, very dangerous precedents. And we need to start having a conversation, a real conversation within the Muslim community about representation, who actually represents us, about our goals and priorities, about the principles we should stand for, and about the priorities that we must pursue, and the red lines that we can never cross. Finally, let me just 1 minute talk about foreign policy. We have many problems within the Muslim world, and America is in the midst of all of them. And therefore, we need to pay special attention when it comes to these issues as American Muslims. If you have any access, if you have any influence, you must start talking seriously to those who are in power, because we made a difference. We made a difference in 2000, and we made a difference this year. And I would exclude those who claim to have made a difference from those who actually were on the ground making a difference. I think we need to stop the war in Yemen. I think we need to bring these dictatorships who are holding millions and millions of Arabs and Muslims under the dictates of some military powers or dictators. We need to bring this to the issue back to where we can empower the people. We need to bring the issue of Palestine and Kashmir back at the forefront as social as justice issues, and not simply as grand designs. There are huge human rights violations that are taking place today, and that we need to bring some sense to what's taking place today in terms of the limits of military interventions and the need for involvement of citizen lobbying and citizen involvement. And that's a tall order, of course. I don't expect much of that, but at least as a community, they need to stand up for these issues. I know that Mujeeb will talk about Turkey, so I'm not going to talk about it, because this is very important, since Turkey is playing a huge role within this region, and there is there's a great fear that it will be targeted for the purpose of trying to bring it down in line of what American policy might be in this region, and that's certainly is something that is worrisome. Let me stop here, and then I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Dr. Sami. Before I go over to Mujeeb, quick question. In all of your travels and activism and speaking, have you met President-elect Biden before? Do you know Joe?
Biden, I have never spoken with him. I've met him probably within a group, if I remember correctly, back when he was in the Senate, but not as vice president. When he was vice president, I was actually under house arrest. But I know that he, when some people approached the president, the Turkish president, back in 2014 about my case, and I didn't have a country to go to, he had a meeting afterwards with Biden, and he gave him my file, and he received two weeks after that, he received a call from Biden telling him that you can have your Palestinian scholar. So he was familiar with my case and my file. Just this is what I've been told by the people who received that phone call.
We're happy to have the Palestinian scholar in Istanbul. Another quick question, Dr. Sami, you mentioned that it's important before you seek political power, you need to have your own civil rights, and we need to fight for that as the African American community has done and continues to do, and that a potential strategy now is to seek a role within other social movements. There's been a lot of, it seems, actually bipartisan agreement in the United States that both Republicans and Democrats are concerned about China. Are we able to push, how many Muslim issues can we push into the Uyghur situation in terms of fighting for their rights and then expanding from there to Palestinians and others? How much can we actually use that as a stepping stone?
Let me separate these two things. First, on the issue of domestic politics, I think our civil rights, part of our civil rights today, first of all, we have to engage ourselves with other social movements today that are trying to reach, racial justice. They're trying to reach economic justice and all justice issues, Black Lives Matter and others. Muslim community must start uniting with these people at the local level, at state level, and also at the national level. No doubt in my mind. But we as American Muslims, people who live in America, who are Muslims, they must also put at their center those who have been wronged by the so-called war on terror. We have hundreds of Muslims in prison that no one wants to talk about. You can't even bring out their names in mosques. Brother Mauri has been at the forefront of this fight. We can't even bring the name of Aafia Siddiqui, who's been sentenced to 86 years in a mosque, for people, for average Muslims, for new generations of Muslims to know what she has had to go through. And like her, we have hundreds others. We have to embrace this, and that fight must be front and center and must be public and vocal in order to get them either relief or some kind of new trials or something, because what has happened to him is travesty of justice. So that should be part of the struggle. On the other front, the foreign front, I'm not sure that, let me put it this way, all the information we get about China and about India and about others, they are heartbroken, because when you are someone in America and you are hearing about these persecutions and that taking place in Kashmir, in India, in China, in Burma and others, that puts, of course, more pressure on you to start moving in that direction. But at the same time, you don't want to be a tool in the hands of American imperialism to be used as a club. You want to make sure that whatever information you have is absolutely truthful information, true information, and therefore you are fighting for real justice, not for justice that is serving imperialism, and it has a lot of propaganda part of it. So I'm not trying to belittle all the sacrifices that are taking place there, but we need to establish movements that are based on these kind of notions, genuine justice, not justice that suits America. So if America is against Assad, then we are with the Syrians. But if it's against Palestinians, then we shy away from that. If America is with India, we shy away from Kashmir. But if it is against China, then we try to champion Uyghurs. We have to be, with all weak people and with all persecuted people, regardless where they are, but we have to have our own information rather than rely on American propaganda machines.
Thank you, Dr. Sami. Mujeeb, are you available? Let's try to speak with you. How do you see the Biden administration and potential policy with Turkey? When we spoke yesterday, I was excited to hear your opinion on this.
Able to use your phone? Can you use your phone instead? I think instead of his computer, probably there is a problem with his computer. If he could use the phone and sign in through your phone rather than your computer.
In the meantime, I have a question for the panelists that are have spoken so far. If we take the issue of foreign policy as being a measure for how we judge whether or not we're committed to the principles of justice, it seems like American Muslim activism has done very little for the Muslim world. So it doesn't matter if it's new immigrants or indigenous African Americans. What we see is that the Muslim world is going from bad to worse. And there's little impact of what American Muslims can and cannot do to that. It seems like the American engine, the empire, is just rolling along. And it doesn't matter who is doing the activism in America, but it just seems like there has been an abysmal track record for American Muslims in impacting the effect of empire on the Muslim world. And this doesn't apply just to the new immigrants, but also to African Americans.
Okay, who's this addressed to?
Generally to the panel. I mean, so far we've had a lot of people speaking on this issue. So if anybody wants to jump in and respond, how do we overcome this achievement gap that seems to be bogging down American Muslims?
Well, let me start. I think when it comes to American policy in these areas, most people, they want to sit back and assume that somehow the U.S. is going to come and change things. That's not how things happen. It's actually the other way around. I don't think Muslims or anywhere should expect America to do anything for them. In fact, America, for the most part, in its policies would probably be supporting dictators and supporting despots and so on and so forth. And I think what happened in 2011 is very instructive. What happened in 2011 is America was caught off guard and they had to play along. But at the end of the day, when the counter-revolutionary forces gathered together, the United States allowed them, basically gave them the green light to go ahead and change the situation and defeat the that there were very nascent revolutionary forces. And I don't think we should expect much support from U.S. policies. But what we could do is that there could be opportunities, and people have to take advantage of these opportunities. And some of these opportunities mean also that you must have a very strong advocates within the U.S. structure in which they can try to ask the U.S. to restrain from using its power and influence by propagating the suffering of Muslims, whether in war situations such as Libya and Yemen and Syria, or in other places where they are under the grip of military dictators and other despots. So there is a role for people to be proactive rather than waiting for somehow U.S. is going to change its policy. It's not. It's not going to change its policy unless it has to, and that only comes from being involved on the ground in these countries as well as on the ground in the halls of power within the U.S. system.
My concern was that it doesn't seem that the hard power that would be mustered to make American empire change its position would be managed by a small super minority like the Muslims of America. I think that when we speak about forcing empire into changing its position, little can be expected from American Muslim advocacy on this front of foreign policy. Rather, it seems like the solution might be outside of America. It would be cultivating forces or counterweights in the region, because as we see, like petrodollars from the Gulf achieve a lot more than what is possible for American Muslims, even as citizens, to be able to have influence in DC. So this is a huge structural issue that we have to confront.
Why can't it be both? Always, I'm not saying. Let's say, I mean, I'm not discounting that people here have to do something in their own countries, but why can't the people in the US have even little influence? Because I knew during the 2011 that there was a lot of people trying to ask Obama and his administration not to prolong Mubarak's days. It wasn't the single factor, but it contributed. At least I think it will contribute because the international factor is important. Let me get the others involved here as well.
Sorry,
Can I jump? Oh, okay, thank you. So, I will say that, power within the Muslim community is restricted by design. It's not something that, while there's a lack of organizing, a strength in organizing, there's a lot of forces that, imperialism works to conquer and divide outside as it does inside. But I will add to the point that there have been activists on the ground that have been building and moving to build power amongst different communities. You saw the Black Lives Matter movement build with Palestinian activists, and we saw strength there. people were very, there was a lot of pressure from outside forces on organizations to like kind of push down the power that's happening in those communities, but it hasn't. What's happened is that it's evolved into different communities. We're building with movements and civil rights organizations across the country. That is the base where you need to build. There's a problem with the Muslim community is organizing from the top or from the bottom. It has to be from the bottom up. You have to be informed by the real life issues and informed by community that is impacted. With the Black community, with Muslims come from different identities and different ethnicities, and that has to be the core of what informs how we move forward. I think power can be built in America and should be built by Muslim Americans. There's a conversation we have to have from within on what capitalism looks like for the Muslim community. How does accumulation of wealth impact how we organize? You have a lot of privileged immigrants that come into America from the Muslim community that don't understand what happens and the needs on the ground for impacted communities. That's where the building comes in. We must build. We have no choice but to build. And I firmly believe that we have to be engaged in electoral politics. I don't think we step aside. While we are building our community, we owe it to ourselves here, and is the most moral and ethical stance we can take as to practice our civil rights. You want to be part of a country, you have to be engaging it on every level. That's the problem. A lot of Muslims have not engaged. They're not engaged enough. The strength comes from within, building from within, understanding how to inform, and staying true to your Muslim identity. Doesn't mean you stay in your silo. I'm going to tell you, I'm a Palestinian American. I'm a mother of 9. I'm a grandmother to 5. I'm a hijabi wearing, Muslim abiding woman. But I found more strength as I advocated for different communities, and it strengthened my commitment to uplift the Muslim community in every area. So you'll find that Muslims are stronger when they're connected to different movements, and will build a power base where their voices can't be amplified in different spaces. That's how you build power, from the bottom up.
Can I also jump in here? I think one of the things that we've had to deal with is that instead of playing either a positive or a non-role in some of these foreign policy issues, American Muslims have actually played a negative role. And at the very least, we need to cut back some of that. And we haven't even talked about the scholars, for example, the American Muslim scholars who have basically served as, UAE stooges, for example, and the ways in which they've been complicit in some of these oppressions around the world as well. So if we can at least stop harm, I think that would be step one. And of course, American Muslims are not going to liberate Palestine. American Muslims are not going to liberate Kashmir. Like, to even think that, as I think Obaid mentioned, is a bit farcical. But at the very least, what we can do is within our context here, and I'll use Kashmir as an example, when last year there was this big siege, and after many, many years, the Kashmir American diaspora got mobilized, educated, the community as well as people in power about what was happening and what India is doing. America has its own interests with India that exists, but to the extent that we can at least mitigate, influence certain arms deals, influence, how India is seen in the U.S., we have that capacity. And those countries that serve as the oppressors are worried about that. Whether we like it or not, America still has that kind of power over the rest of the world. So anytime a U.S. congressional official criticizes India on its human rights record, the Indian embassy and people there go completely nuts. And there's a reason for that. So for us, we can play the kind of limited role that we can play until we're able to actually, build with other communities around the world towards achieving our ultimate goal, which is liberation for all of our communities.
if Dr. Mujeeb is not back, I would like to jump in, but otherwise I'll just wait.
Dr. Sami, were you able to talk to Dr. Mujeeb?
Yeah, he's still trying to get in. So when he does, I'll let you know.
You want me to go in, otherwise?
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah,
Mr.
no. Thank you, Doctor. So no, I agree with Professor Hafsa mentioned, and I just want to. I think your question is very important and it's structural, because I think there's a delusion that exists in the West overall, and specifically in the American Muslim community, that the mere engagement within the political platforms or within the political structure will automatically mean that we are, number one, involved in the decision making, number two, have actual impact or influence on policy. And I don't want to sound too negative here, but the reality is, and according to Garland and Page, who issued an outstanding paper in 2014, they did argue that American public overall have near zero influence on policy making, near zero. We're talking about the average American population, average grassroots organizations that do not have relationships with oligarchs, or don't have millions of dollars to spend on media campaigns, to spend on lobbying, to spend into buying congressmen and women in order to advance their policies and advance their agenda. So this is essential for us to understand. Engagement doesn't mean empowerment. Now, this does not mean I'm saying we should not engage. This means that we have to understand the power and the balance of power, or the structure of power that we're dealing with, in order for us to actually have an impact on the policies specifically overseas. So I think this is essential in our understanding of how democracy in this country works. And according to many scientists, in the U.S., it's not an actual democracy. It's more of an oligarchy, where people who have power, people who have money, actually run the show. And Chomsky even talked about this in the concept of manufacturing consent. And I think American Muslims now are deluded to think that they can have that large impact on foreign policy, because what ends up happening here is what we talked about before, the concept of good Muslim and bad Muslim, is that Muslims are giving the opportunity to engage in politics, but only under the conditions and of the platform that they're allowed to participate on, whether it's politically or socially and morally. So now we are given, and here, I think Samia mentioned this earlier on, the example of Linda Sarsour. She has been an outstanding actor for the Democratic Party since 2016, mobilizing the Muslim community to vote Democrats. And the mere moment when she was participating in a DNC, she was demonized by Biden, the highest voice in the Democratic Party. Why? Because her views sometimes on Palestine seem a little bit radical to the political platforms that we're dealing with. So it goes back to what I said earlier. The concept of assimilation for us in this country and Western empires overall require us to let go of our own values, specifically politically. So I'll end with saying this, and I said this earlier, I think Professor Hafsa mentioned it as well. We clearly cannot have a huge impact on the foreign policy of this country. And if we cannot stop American imperialism, the least we could do is not to be used as stooges and used as actors and soldiers to the American empire to continue, or to use us as a cover or as a way to legitimize their oppression and their imperialism in the Middle East. So this is what I said earlier. I don't expect American Muslims to have that large of an impact to stop American imperialism. So they should just focus on their own domestic issues.
I think Mujeeb now is ready.
Yes, can you hear me? Salam, hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Perfect.
Okay, wonderful. I'm sorry about the difficulties. So I would like to speak on the foreign policy angle, and specifically looking at Turkey and the post-Arab Spring Middle East. Is the Biden presidency going to be an improvement or not? And I would argue that it would definitely be. It's certainly not an unmixed picture, and Biden certainly comes with a lot of baggage, and we've discussed a lot of that. But it would still be better than a second Trump administration. The reason being is that Trump is completely beholden to the most extreme elements of the Likud bloc and the Armageddon evangelical movement, as you see with someone like Mike Pompeo and Pence as well. And he would have pursued that agenda in an even more reckless way in the second part of his administration. I think so. If we go back a little, there are reasons for being apprehensive about, certainly on the part of Turkey, for having a jaundiced view of a Biden presidency. And this is, I know, the prevailing view in Turkey today, both at the state level and among much of the public. And there are good reasons for this. It has to go back to the betrayal of the Arab Spring. And that was largely due to a couple of things. One is the feckless nature of Obama himself. He was persuaded to, as the neocons still lament, throw Mubarak under the bus, but he didn't follow up in supporting the democratic transition in Egypt, and they basically looked the other way as the coup went forward. And John Kerry, as we know, played a big role in that as well. And then the same thing happened with Libya, where they wanted to lead from behind, and then in Syria, where they again abandoned any support for meaningful support for the uprisings, but then also prevented Turkey from doing anything. And then with the rise of ISIS, they decided in the Obama administration to back the PKK, YPG, and just limit their intervention to that while letting the genocide by Assad continue. So for all of those reasons, Turkey had a very negative experience with the Biden administration. And then to top it all off, we had the attempted Gulenist coup attempt on July 15th, 2016. And it's not certain to what extent the U.S. was involved in that or not, but they were clearly not too upset by it. And the fact that Gulen was orchestrating all of these activities to undermine the democratically elected government in Turkey from within the United States has certainly is certainly a basis for why Turkey is very upset on these issues with the U.S. Now, so when you had Trump come in, what President Erdogan did was he did, in a masterful way, play to Trump's ego, his vanity, establish a personal rapport that did help mitigate the extremely anti-Turkish, anti-Muslim policies that were being pushed in the rest of the administration regarding the Middle East. So when it came to, for example, sanctions and related to S-400s and CATSA and so on, we were able to mitigate that. But it was only provisional. And it was only temporary. And that's the important point to keep in mind, because remember what happened with Syria and Operation Peace Shield, where Turkey intervened in Afrin against the YPG PKK along its borders. Trump himself wanted to get out of the Middle East. He was sick of these endless wars and bring the troops home. And so he basically agreed to that. But this created a huge uproar immediately. And even the evangelicals, who said they would support Trump no matter what he did, they said, when this happened, they said, now the blessings from God and so on were taken away from the American nation. The reason was, of course, that the Israelis, Saudis, and the UAE, which was the countervailing anti-Arab Spring, anti-democratic alliance in the region, were deadly opposed to this. They were the ones who got together and pushed for the coup in Egypt, and also were supporting the Gulenists in the attempted coup against Turkey, the attempted invasion of Qatar. It was all a plan amongst these three to roll back the Arab Spring. And Trump immediately then went back on his green light, and he remembered that notorious letter, "Don't be a fool, don't be a tough guy," and immediately reversed his position. So my point is that when push comes to shove, Trump would have in the second term gone definitely full, even more full throttle in supporting the KSA, UAE, Israeli alliance in the region, which was to roll back the Arab Spring, saddle the region with bloody dictators like Sisi, like Haftar, and also target Turkey then as the main supporter of democratic movements in the region and of Muslim causes and of persecuted Muslims from North Africa to Kashmir and to East Turkestan as well. So then my conclusion would be that it is overall a net positive that Trump was defeated, not just for being the horrible racist, white supremacist, and kind of deranged individual he is domestically, but also specifically regarding the Muslim world as well. Because I think there is an opportunity now to improve Turkey's relationship and its the vital role it's playing in the region going forward with the Biden administration. The reason being is that while Biden has made very obnoxious comments regarding President Erdogan, for example, in his meeting with the New York Times not long ago, and so again, that's another reason why many people in Turkey are justified in having a jaundiced view of him. He's made much more critical statements regarding MBS and the killing of Khashoggi, and then Egypt and Sisi as well, where he said that he's a brutal dictator and things won't be the same. So this is something you never would have heard from Trump. So what I'm arguing is that there is a chance here that this full-on embracement of the KSA Israeli UAE counter-revolutionary alliance, that this will be suspended. And this will be vital. That's all Turkey really needs, is that that support is not there. Because you see, in two cases, in Syria and in Libya, the evangelicals and the Likud were able to prevail to undermine Turkey, even when it was very much in the interest of Turkey as the main NATO power containing Russia, for example, in the region. They preferred Russia. So what happened is that in Syria, because Bolton and Pompeo turned over the bases that the U.S. forces were, they turned them over to the Russians rather than even having a NATO ally like Turkey have them. And then in the case of Libya, Bolton green-lighted the UAE, French, Russian assault on Tripoli. And it was the last-minute Turkish intervention that forestalled that defeated them. So in both those cases, they even went against NATO interests, even what their own Africa Com, State Department professionals and others were advocating for ideological reasons. Now, I think that will be reversed in the Biden administration because Biden has said that NATO is his top priority and that containing Russia is his top priority. So this inevitably means that this attempt to use Russia against Turkey is now going to be mitigated. And so I think it improves Turkey's strategic posture in the region greatly. The second thing I would argue is that I think there are people, from what I've been reading, and this includes Anthony Blinken, who is likely to be the next national security advisor or Secretary of State. They come to the realization that the abandonment of the Arab Spring was a disaster, that it's fueling, that saddling the region with dictators just creates more, ISIS is Sisi spelled backwards. It creates more of these, creates more of terrorism, the instability that's undermining now democracies in Western Europe and the US as well. This is part of the karma or blowback from these wretched neo-imperialist policies in the region. So I think given that, and given the rise of the multipolar order, there is an opportunity here for Turkish-American relations to improve and Turkey's strategic posture in the region to improve. And that's absolutely vital. What we just saw with the victory in Azerbaijan opens up Turkey's connections to the Muslim republics of Central Asia directly. It also was a defeat for Russia, because Russia did not want to see this solution, wanted to keep Turkey out and keep the frozen conflict in place. And it was a defeat for them. So I think going forward, what we'll see, there's a great opportunity here for Turkey and then Pakistan, Malaysia, Indonesia to re-energize this new Islamic bloc that's emerging, that seeks to integrate the region, seeks to promote representative and accountable governments, and views mainly the Al Saud and Al Nahyan families. These are the two families which basically all of these negative, anti-democratic, imperialist policies that the Israelis have been pushing, and neocons and evangelicals. It's basically that unholy alliance. And the next step would be then to go after them much more aggressively. And you're already seeing some positive developments from this. So I'm not completely negative as many people are. I think, in politics, you need to have good cops and bad cops. And you need to engage both in terms of domestic politics and foreign policy in this way to be effective. And so you're seeing already, for example, the announced sale to UAE, $25 billion for drones and F-35 aircrafts and so on. Cory Booker and others have already said they're opposed to this, that UAE's crimes in Libya, the horrible war in Yemen that both UAE and Saudi Arabia engineered, that must stop, and that arms sales to UAE must not go forward either. So you would never have heard that if the Republicans had won the presidency. So I'm a little more optimistic, I think. And I think the path forward for Muslims would be, both within the US and abroad, would be to keep hammering on this need for getting, to support human rights and representative and accountable governments in the Muslim world as an issue, not just of an altruistic motives, but something that's essential for preserving democracy in the West as well, because we're seeing the fallout from the refugee crisis, fallout from blowback, and these endless wars has directly impacted and undermined democracy in Western Europe and in the United States as well. And so those are the kind of points we need to be pushing forward. And the other would be within the Muslim world, we need to be the great tragedy. And this is, very well understood in Turkey now, and certainly in the government circles, that the breakup of the Ottoman state is the great tragedy that happened to Muslims. And it's led to a century of fragmentation, of constant interventions from the West and from Russia as well, the loss of millions of lives, and the enshrining of these despotic handful of families, essentially, that control the wealth, natural resource of the wealth region, the wealth of the region. So what's necessary going forward with that realization is regional, economic, political, security integration in the core of the Islamic civilizational area. But to do that, you would need representative and accountable governments. And so this is, in fact, why you had this counter-revolution. It was just fear of exactly that, and this is exactly what's motivating the Israelis and the Saudi royal family and the Al Nahyan. But it's a very weak leg that they're standing on. It's essentially these two families, and and they need to be brought to justice. That you need to pressure them. They're brittle regimes, and without the massive support they were counting on from Kushner and Pompeo and others, they're not going to be in a good position. So I'm more optimistic about that. And by the way, if anyone's interested on this topic, there's a new genre of literature. I would recommend you read and look at the website of Bruno Macias, who writes about this, called The Rise of the Civilizational State. Christopher Coker and a few other people have written on this. And there's this website as well by James Dorsey, who discusses some of these themes relating to the Islamic world in the Middle East. But again, it goes back to this argument, this thesis that I've been underscoring, which was that unlike China, unlike India, Islamic civilization, and certainly its core lands, were fragmented with the dismantling of the Ottoman state. And that explains all of the great tragedies and suffering that we've seen since Sykes-Picot a century ago. And that is, we need to think, in a theoretical and rigorous way of how we go about undoing that. So some of the ideas that what I'm proposing is, we look at that. And I think in terms of regional integration, promoting representative and accountable governments, and then socio-economic development by pooling the resources of the region together. That's the only way to go forward. And American Muslims and Western Muslims have a vital role to play in this, in that we have to keep the pressure up. We have to use our connections both at home and as well as abroad to challenge policies that are working against this, that are working against what was the promise of the Arab Spring and reform in the region as well. So that would be the way to go forward.
Thank you, Mujeeb. I have one question, if you can answer briefly. We'll
Sure.
extend for 15 minutes, and then
Okay.
Brother Mauri, Dr. Sami had sent you a question to
Sure.
look at. My question, and perhaps this is the question I have for everyone to end this webinar. We know this is an opportunity. Trump has trashed the institutions, the intelligence community, not just hit a reset button, a delete button, and he's continuing to be destructive on his way out. We know this is an opportunity. My question, the question is Joe Biden going to see this as an opportunity and restart and analyze this with data and evidence and current information, or is he going to go back to those advisors that he had before? And is this going to be Obama's smokescreen round 3?
Yeah, that's a good question. So from what I've been reading about just the kind of background discussion of where an Obama administration is likely to go in terms of its foreign policy. One, they're very concerned about Russia. They're going to take a much harder line on Russia. And we've already seen one positive outcome from that, which is that one reason why Russia basically surrendered to Turkey and Azerbaijan's fundamental demands in getting ceasefire and in the war to liberate Azerbaijani territory was that Putin's very much afraid that Biden's going to take a very hard line, and he can't afford to completely alienate Turkey. So already I think there's a positive ramification from that. And I think when it comes to the Middle East, Biden will be he's not going to push against Israel or support BDS or anything of that sort. I think that's a given. He's very much a centrist kind of politician on that score. But what's going to be very positive, I think, is he's going to take a much harder line on Egypt and Saudi Arabia. You know, the plan was, if Trump had won the election, within the first month, MBS was going to, Mohammed bin Salman was going to fly to Washington and announce a grand peace deal and full recognition of Israel. That was the plan, with Netanyahu next to him and the UAE a despot as well, and wash the blood of Khashoggi from his hands. That was the plan. And Trump himself has said that. He said that. He's on record as saying that that was the plan, and to rehabilitate them. Now, you know, MBS cannot come to the U.S. And that kind of plan that they had is not going to fly now if Trump is not there. And same with Mohammed bin Zayed, MBZ of UAE. He was very much involved, you know, and the FBI is aware of this. Even before Trump's election, they were involved working with Joel Zamil and some Israeli intelligence outfits as well in trying to influence the American election, which led, of course, to the rise of Trump, which, you know, it's left very deep anger in the American security establishment. So a lot of this stuff is going to be coming out as well. So my point is that while support for Israel and refusal to really pressure Israel in meaningful ways, that will likely stay in place. I think the hammer is going to come down much harder on UAE KSA. And that's, as I mentioned, with the arms deals already, that's become a big controversy now. So I think that in itself, just that alone, is enormously positive, because what we've seen is from Libya to Palestine to, even going to Kashmir and the alliance with Modi that the UAE and the Saudis have been attempting to construct, all of these anti-Muslim sort of alliances and movements, you had these two royal families, essentially, these two, Al Saud, Al Nahyan. And if they don't have the enormous protection that Kushner and Pompeo were giving them, because of ideological reasons connected to Israel and the evangelicals, they're going to be in a very vulnerable position. And that's great benefit for Turkey and for all the pro-Muslim and pro-reform and democratic forces in the region. So for those reasons, for those reasons that I laid out, one is great power competition. The U.S. is energized to contain China, to contain Russia. And on that regard as well, I think there's going to be, because Trump was completely, in a way, weird. We don't know why, but there's a lot of rumors that the Russians had compromised on him and so on. But they were willing to let Putin almost do anything, which is not what the traditional foreign policy establishment wanted. With Biden there, and if he's going to be back, looking at balance of power politics vis-a-vis China and Russia, that means that Turkey is going to be much more important. So is Pakistan, Malaysia, Indonesia. And it was, in fact, the Saudis and the UAE who were letting the Russians in. Remember, in Syria, in 2015, it was UAE and the Saudis who invited in Russian intervention, along with Iran. Now, we might wonder, that's strange, because they were supposed to be so anti-Iran, right? And yes, they were anti-Iran. They wanted the US to fight a war on their behalf against Iran. But as Yossi Cohen, the head of Mossad, was quoted in Middle East Eye, there's a meeting and it was leaked, the records of the meeting. Yossi Cohen said the real danger is not Iran, because Iran has limited capacity and influence as a state in the region and in the broader Muslim world, but it's Turkey. That's who they fear. And all of the sanctions, not allowing sophisticated technology to go to Turkey and so on. All of this was part of this containment strategy, creating a sort of PKK state along Turkey's border, putting Haftar in power. But that's been undermined effectively by President Erdogan, who I think, has shown remarkable skill and strategic thinking and vision. But going forward, I think that this is a net improvement. I'm not, Pollyannish about Biden, but for the reasons I laid out, I think it's still a second Trump administration would have been completely beholden to the evangelical base and to the Lichudniks. And it would have been an absolute disaster. So it's a great relief, both in terms of domestic policy, but also foreign policy, that he's out. Now, that doesn't mean that we let up on Biden, or, think he's a savior, or peace and hope, or change and hope, as Obama, was promising. No, we have to keep the pressure on them.
Thank you, Doctor.
Okay.
We agree, we understand, and hopefully this is going to be a new opportunity. Interesting points that we'll follow up on later. That could be an additional new webinar on Turkey's new position in light of this transition of power. Brother Mauri, Dr. Sami had a question for you regarding new immigrants to the United States. Is there a way that you could recommend bridging a gap between immigrant Muslims and the African-American Muslim community? Unmute, Doctor. Brother Mauri, there we
go. Yes, and in my response, let me say, in listening to different speakers, the different panelists. Alhamdulillah, I've gained a tremendous amount of insight from them all. But a lot has been building up. So in addition to this question that you want me to respond to concerning immigrants, I'd like to incorporate some of these other responses that have been building up within me of what I feel I need to say. First of all, yes, we have a responsibility to reach out to immigrant populations, especially those immigrant populations that are being oppressed. And this brings me to a very important point. Biden's interaction with the Muslim community, the Biden administration's reaction or interaction with the Muslim community will be predicated on how much pressure he receives to engage in a respectful and positive way. And this is a very important point. America's Muslim community has tremendous potential for being agents for positive change in America and the world on many fronts, including immigration, and including the immigration of our non-Muslim brethren who are being oppressed, especially those from south of the American border, coming from Mexico and some of the other Spanish-speaking territories, many of whom have their children locked up in cages, many of whom have children that they will never be reunited with, subhanAllah, because of the haphazard way, deliberately haphazard way in which these families looking for sanctuary were dealt with. Again, we have a tremendous opportunity for being potential agents for positive change. I respectfully disagree with the call for Muslims to restrict themselves to domestic affairs. That was precisely the advice that Muslims were given by some of their high-placed non-Muslim friends in 2000, when we put Bush II in office, and we can see where that got us. According to Islam, we have an obligation to be a voice for the voiceless to the best of our ability wherever they are. And not just for oppressed Muslims, but again for oppressed peoples across the board. What's needed, in my humble opinion, are the following. Allah consciousness, number one. We must hone and rely upon our trust in the Creator. Number two, unified struggle, as opposed to this strident ethnic and political partisanship we've seen from, a well-resourced but very divided Muslim polity in America. Thirdly, we must recognize the nature of our struggle and the nature of the opposition. Brothers and sisters, and I say this in love and respect, we've got to get away from defining our struggle as a civil rights struggle. It is not a civil rights struggle. It is a human rights struggle. This is something that Malcolm expressed vigorously, over a half century ago, and Dr. Martin Luther King came to this conclusion as well. And then that is when some of his fellow civil rights leaders kind of distanced themselves from him in the final year of his life. He recognized the struggle of Black America as a human rights struggle. American politicians operate from the philosophical mindset there are no permanent friends or enemies, only interests. America's two major political parties are two sides of the same coin. This is another realization that we must come to. And as we engage the political process, we must be independent in our actions and deeds, always conscious, protective, and positively assertive of our values and principles. And then lastly, I want to share something that a brother sent to me, shared with me, a good brother of mine from out of Massachusetts. And this is something that all Muslims, if we are truly committed to our deen, Islam is more than a religion, it's a deen. It is a system of life and living. If we are truly committed, we need to take the words of our dear brother to heart. He said, no matter who sits in the White House, Allah is the Almighty. No matter who controls the House and Senate, Allah is the ultimate authority. No matter who sits on the Supreme Court, Allah is the best and most powerful of judges. I bear witness that Allah is one, without partners, and that Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is his slave and messenger. I seek refuge in Allah from being in awe of anyone or anything besides Allah. I ask Allah for wisdom and courage to do what is right and to always put my trust in Allah above any of Allah's creation. Ameen. And let me just say in closing, I approve this message.
Ameen. Thank you.
I
Brother
second
Mauri.
you, brother. What an amazing inspiration you are. Thank you.
Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah.
I don't have any other questions for our panel. I think collectively we see common theme of a deep breath of relief that we can at least have some civility in the White House. It's been interesting this last week watching journalists who they're smiling, they're happy. They know that they'll be speaking to somebody intelligent again. For me, it was a flashback when Raja talked about President Bush and his speech about good Muslims and bad Muslims. I had forgotten about that, and I remember how unintelligent everybody thought President Bush was. And then having Donald Trump, when we look back to President Bush, we realized that he was at least somewhat presidential. It's good that we will go back to a new direction. Dr. Sami would like everyone to give a 1-minute final statement on where things headed with Joe Biden. Final thoughts. Let's start with Samia. Would you like to give your last minute?
Try to keep it to a minute. My last words are the Muslim community has to be woke, has to or get now ahead of the game and organize, commit to creating institutions that'll have accountability, be transparent, and be authentic in its representation. I also have to address the issue of how we engage the Biden campaign vis-a-vis Israel-Palestine. You will see a lot of the massaging the image of Israel happen during the Biden campaign. Many Jewish Americans were not happy, even though Trump gave them Israel what they wanted, but at the same time they lost a lot of the element of the humanistic image that Jewish Americans have held on to. So now you will see the massaging of the Israeli image, and we have to make sure to hold them accountable to the true face of oppression overseas. That's a battle we're going to have to take on ASAP. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Brother Mauri, final minute.
Well, let me just, in my final minute, I want to encourage my brothers and sisters to get a book by the late radical lawyer, Bill Kunstler, who authored a book entitled My Life as a Radical Lawyer. In that book, there is a chapter titled The Despised Muslims. And one of the opening paragraphs reads, "Today, Muslims are the most hated group in America. The moment a Muslim is accused of a crime, the specter of terrorism is raised and everyone panics," end quote. This book was published in 1994. We have a tendency of referencing 9/11 as if everything, they like to try to make us believe that everything changed after 9/11. That is a bunch of BS. This madness that we have been seeing is something that began many years before 9/11, and 9/11 just gave those who had these designs in the wings, just gave them an opportunity to take the stuff off the shelves and dust it off and employ it. So we've got to be conscious of this. We've got to be conscious of our responsibility to be voices for the voiceless, both here and abroad. And may Allah Ta'ala bless us toward that end.
Thank you, Brother Mauri. Raja, final minute.
I think my minute is a message to the Muslim community here is that it doesn't matter whether who the person who sits in the White House is presidential or not, because they both are involved in committing massacres and genocide against our brothers and sisters overseas. Whether it's Obama, Bush, or Trump, or Biden, they all killed countless of Muslims around the world. And no matter how presidential the person in the White House is, structural racism still exists. Obama had an opportunity to do something about structural racism. Unfortunately, he did not do it. No matter how nice his words are, no matter how diplomatic he is, as Professor Hafsa said before, smoke screen to continue American imperialism outside of America, but at the same time to continue the status quo within America. And finally, I think the political community, as was mentioned earlier, as Professor Sami and others, we have to work towards the political empowerment of the Muslim community, and that does not only mean engaging in electoral politics. That's only an aspect of it. But without having power ourselves as a community, why would politicians even listen to us? So we have to build internally. We have to build our communities. We have to empower it before. I don't want to say before, but at the same time while we're doing other actions.
Thank you, Raja. Mujeeb, are you still available? 1 minute, sir. Unmute 1 minute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, you're good.
Okay, wonderful. So I would say that the key is to keep the progressive wing of the Democratic Party energized and work through that to take on the centrists. Because, people are right to be skeptical of Biden as Obama 2.0, that he want to be very much a centrist, not rock the boat. I think that's an accurate assessment. But what I see as different is that there has been definitely the rise with AOC, Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, the victory of Jamal Bowman and Cory Bush, the rise of the progressive wing, despite all the efforts to stifle them, of the Democratic Party. And that's essential to work to address structural racism domestically, as well as imperialism and racism in American policies abroad. And so, I think the defeat of these centrist Democrats, like Eliot Engel, for example, that was absolutely crucial, because the way the system worked was that you had the Republicans, but then you had Democrats when it came to essentially these policies who were not very different. And so you see that with Sheldon Adelson being the #1 donor to the Republican Party, but Haim Saban, whose policies and ideology were no different than Sheldon Adelson's, being the #1 donor to the Democratic Party. So the defeat of Eliot Engel has been crucial, because what they did was, when it came to, I'm talking about foreign policy now, House Intelligence or Senate and House Foreign Affairs committees, they put these guys in charge. So there would be no change, and it would be very much a neo-Zionist and neo-imperialist policy towards the Muslim world. But we're able to shake that up. So we need to keep working with these progressives and keep throwing this in Biden's face whenever he wants to go back to his default position, to embarrass them, to shame them, and to keep the pressure on.
Thank you. Dr. Sami, final comment?
Thank you very much, everybody, for being with us and for the enlightenment that you have provided in this discussion. Biden said that he is going to have an open access to American Muslims to the administration. They're going to have a seat at the table. But I think to which Muslims? I think we need to make sure that authentic representation of Muslims would be at that seat, not phony ones. This is very, very important for authentic organizations to come together and to unite under a program, or at least some issues that would be crucial, to prioritize their issues and to have a united front and to draw the red lines and to ask directly to the Biden administration that we are the ones that are representing authentically the American Muslim community. And with that, of course, we need to include all segments. It can't be immigrants, cannot be indigenous, it has to be all segments of the American Muslim community. They have to come together. They have to establish this authenticity and not to allow others to hijack the community. And secondly, they need to know what the issues are of the day that they need to press upon and to draw their priorities and to know their red lines. That doesn't mean that they have to agree on every issue with the Biden administration, but they need to make that very clear. Being authentic and being independent is to tell them where you disagree with them, not to put it, under the rug that, okay, I'm not going to talk about this because this may anger them. Let them be angry, because if they respect you, then they would respect you with the differences, not just with the things that you agree with them on. So I believe that this is the moment. We would never have that chance with Trump, but now you have the opportunity to actually raise to the occasion and receive respectability by having that kind of standing up to power. And respectfully, you can disagree with them, or sometimes not respectfully if they transgress. But at the end of the day, we need to be to establish our own authentic representatives. Otherwise, you will find that people are speaking on our behalf, on behalf of American Muslims, and gaining all kinds of privileges at the expense of the American Muslims, who will get completely distraught and may withdraw completely from the political process. And I think that's very dangerous for the community and its empowerment.
Thank you, Dr. Sami. Uwais, do you have any final insights? You're extremely analytical and have been sending me messages and assisting me behind the scenes. Thank you, Brother Uwais. Any final comments before we
No, thank you very much.
call it a night?
I want to thank all the panelists for joining us, and we hope to see you back at CIGA at our future events.
Thank you, everyone. You may
Thank you for
all
having us.
you may all resume your doom scrolling. Those of you in America, best of luck to you. Inshallah, everything goes well. Wash your hands. Be careful when you go out. We're concerned about you here in Turkey, and you're welcome in Turkey where things are good. Thank you all. Good evening, everyone. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you.